International students are losing money. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Working through my morning stein of coffee, particularly on these cold Brisbane mornings we seem to have at the moment. And I thought we'd have a look at this article discussing international students, particularly from China, who are losing their money after a property agency simply disappears. Now, student accommodation is a big part of Australia's property sector. There's demand for, well, small, studio-esque style student apartments around and near most universities, and it's an investment vehicle that a lot of people have bought into. I remember looking at them back in the day even, these tiny little shoeboxes. They've got nice facilities. You often have to pay rather high body corporate to maintain those facilities, but a steady flow of students coming to Australia. That was until the world went into economic lockdown, international tourism plunged, and international student numbers pretty much fell completely off a cliff. Some universities even invested in these properties, invested in them. And I'd be worried to think how many super funds, you can see here eSuper's advertising on my website, how many super funds have invested in these apartments, particularly individuals. Let me know if you know anyone, guys, because they're going to take a hit. Because you can't just, well, can you flip them? Can they change their rules to allow normal people to move into them? It's usually targeted at students and it's charged at a premium rate for what it is. So scores of Chinese students lose money after a property agency just simply disappears. Disappears. A Chinese company that leased apartments to students from China living in Melbourne has gone out of business because of the pandemic, leaving behind scores of renters who have each lost thousands of dollars in deposits. Home Plus prompted itself as an experienced real estate service organization that provides its Chinese clientele with best service, offering best quality properties throughout Melbourne's CBD. But a large group of overseas students, likely more than 150 people, and some local landlords who rented their properties via Home Plus, have lost money to the company, which last month applied to deregister itself and all but disappeared. Well, how is this going to... Well, this is definitely going to leave a stain on this sector, guys. Where's the confidence in it? I would be terrified, actually, if I'd invested significant money in these type of properties now. The company ran a property leasing website, Jai Ho, which targeted overseas students coming to live in Melbourne. It leased dozens of apartments in Melbourne CBD, Docklands, and West Melbourne, and then made money by subleasing these properties to Chinese citizens coming to the city to study. So, a middleman, literally a middleman, literally a rent seeker, that I guess the only benefit they're providing to the market is bridging the cultural gap between students coming to Australia from China and the local market. Would you say that's fair? How long would it take them to wise up when they get over here thinking, wait a minute. The pandemic meant many Chinese students were unable to return to Melbourne from China this year, leaving Home Plus unable to pay its leases. But until April, the company kept taking rental payments and bonds from students. It never handed those bonds to Consumer Affairs, Victoria's Rental Tenancy Bond Authority, as required under state rental laws. Okay, so they were a dodgy rent-seeking middleman. How am I not surprised, everyone? How am I not surprised? The Age has been in contact with dozens of Chinese students and property owners who are angry about losing money to Home Plus. Most have lost upwards of $2,000. On the mobile phone app WeChat, a group has more than 170 members, almost all lost money to the company. Home Plus is supposed to return my $3,000 bond paid to them while they are claiming they are under bankruptcy, said one Chinese student. $3,000. I guess the rent's pretty expensive for these shoebox things, guys. A lot of them are shoeboxes. And how many students do they have crammed into some of these apartments? How many bunk beds do they have in there? Not that I can talk. We've got lots of bunk beds in our house with all the kids we have, but it's a bit different when you've got a family than when you've got people renting apartments. So, Kathy's son said HomePlus failed to lodge her bond with the bond authority, meaning I have no guarantee that my money will come back. Yeah, you've probably lost it, I'm afraid. HomePlus's website is now shut down, and many tenants who had paid their rent and landlords who were meant to receive payments have been left clueless of what to do. Among the properties HomePlus leased in Melbourne and then subleased to Chinese students were 23 apartments in a tower at 65 Dudley Street, West Melbourne. Okay, so they weren't taking entire buildings, they were taking portions of buildings. So these guys really were middlemen. They weren't even focusing on student accommodation. So it really was just literally rent-seeking due to the cultural divide. Joseph Bellow runs Waterdale Property Agents, which leased the apartments to HomePlus from 2017. He said he'd been dubious when introduced to the company via the building's developer. But had eventually been convinced they were okay. Now, well, we just saw in the previous video I did earlier today about Canberra developers having to pay compensation to buyers because they changed the GST status of their sales and pocketed the difference. So, well, I'm starting to see a pattern here, guys. I'm starting to see a pattern here. Now, this is what's worse. Do you think this is or the integrated services in some of these buildings? If you haven't heard about the integrated services, this is where the builder or developer will sell the service rights to a supplier, and they will install all the cabling, all the wiring, everything to the building. Then they have the contract to provide power and data to that building. Then every tenant in that building has to go through that company. They're the middleman. They're literally the rent seeker there. So, you know, it's a good way for that business to make money. They install the infrastructure. They own it. They can pull it all out. It's not part of the building, which seems insane because then the building wouldn't be fit for purpose. You've got this third party that's integrated right into the building. So, yes, I'm getting more and more biased as the days go by with regards to some of this sector. Buyers need to be made aware of the risks they're actually taking on. Rental payments from the apartments HomePlus managed had always come on time, Mr. Bellow said. Until recently, then they started falling behind with Chinese students not being able to come back to Australia. A lot of Chinese students got stranded in China and the apartments were empty for 2 to 3 months, he said. He said HomePlus had not planned to rip off students, but that the pandemic had destroyed their business. They were not scammers, they were a business that went bust, he said. Well, then why were they not putting deposits in with the appropriate authority? There's a question. That's dodgy right there. Right there. So maybe they were getting desperate and trying to use the deposits they were getting, the bond deposits they were getting to keep the business going. They were turning it into a Ponzi scheme. So that screams of desperation. He said HomePlus have basically disappeared. He said they had been situations where students had paid rent to HomePlus, but the company had not passed this money on to landlords. In other cases, Chinese students who had paid a bond to HomePlus in China had lost it. One receipt from a Chinese student who did not want his name used showed he had lost more than $2,000 as a rental deposit on a flat. The Age has been told the company leased multiple apartments in Victoria 1 Tower at the corner of Elizabeth and Franklin Streets in the CBD. Among those it leased in that tower from HomePlus were Gavin Yuan, who moved out last year. He still owed what he said was hundreds of dollars for his bond. It's not a legal business from the very start, he said. One Chinese property agent, who asked not to be named, leased a Lawmere Street Docklands property via HomePlus. He said hundreds of Chinese students who leased an apartment through the company were now owed between $2,500 to $3,500 each. Most would not get that money back, he said. Consumer Affairs Victoria would not comment on the case. One of the authorities' records show that at one point HomePlus was a licensed real estate agent in Melbourne, although that registration has been cancelled. HomePlus senior property manager Chris Sun, who was in China, said in an email that there had been a misunderstanding and that any issues were almost solved. Due to the severity of the disaster, the company's business is having a financial problem, he said, but did not respond to further questions. So, there we have it, guys. There we have it. Do you think this will leave a stain on the international accommodation sector here in Australia? Perhaps it's not big enough, I think, to leave a lasting legacy, but some people may be more, well, careful. And it's going to remove opportunities for landlords to rent out their businesses and be just another little mark on this sector that's suffering a lot right now. What do you think, guys? Would it be property that you'll be chasing? Maybe if there's in 6 months' time when these banks remove their support. You'd hate to be, dependent on the money coming in to keep these things going, particularly now. When's the sign of recovery? Has there been even any mention of bringing international students in or opening international tourism? We'll have to see. As always, please leave your thoughts, opinions, and comments down below. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and you'd like to support the work we're doing here, there are a few ways you can. You can join the channel on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us via affiliate links at Amazon or eBay or Independent Reserve and Kucoin. You can use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, support us via buying our merch, or also support us via PayPal. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.